I sat down to record this and then I realised that I've been wearing the same dress in every video I've filmed recently, so sorry about that, but you know, today is a different day, a very different day. Long time has passed since then, but just like, you know, I'm moving and I really like this dress, so clearly I'm wearing it more often than, you know, I don't know, previously. I don't know, whatever, it's fine. Yeah, there hasn't been a video recently for a while because I'm moving, and yeah, I'm moving, so. Anyway, but I'm here to film my August wrap up, which obviously I did make like a TBR for, so you kind of have some sense of what I was trying to read, although obviously as usual, like, I'm not very good at following through, and because of all the logistics and the travelling and I guess just like the stress, I definitely feel like I just couldn't read as much as I wanted to, and I couldn't really read in the way that I sort of planned to at the beginning of the month, which I guess maybe I should have thought about before I made my plans, but whatever. I always feel like I underestimate how long it's going to take me to read something, because I do read a lot, but then like, you know, I still, like, I'm probably like borderline dyslexic at this point. Like, I was very dyslexic as a kid at school, and then when I've taken recent tests they've always told me now that I'm like borderline between the two. But you know, I definitely feel like I still experience like dyslexic vibes around reading, especially. Well, I guess actually around maths way more, but like because I don't interact with maths very often, it doesn't really affect my life. Anyway, that's all irrelevant. So the first thing I read in August was a short story by Toni Morrison, which has been on my like TBR for a while, but especially because I think there was, I'm not sure exactly the anniversary, but maybe like, I think last year, or maybe, I'm not sure, but there is like, or there was an anniversary of this short story recently, and so I saw some people like writing stuff about it, which made me more interested in reading it. And I do want to read more Toni Morrison, but I personally don't think I can read some of her books because of the subject matter in them. So but I want to read her work, and I have read Sula, which I loved, so I'm also, you know, I want to like share in her excellence. And yeah, so I read this, and so this is recitative, I think is how you say it, but I don't know. And it's, yeah, the short story, and it's about these two young girls at the beginning, or like it kind of traces them through their lives a little bit. It's only maybe like 20 pages, I want to say, and it's really fascinating. It's like, it kind of blows my mind a bit because, you know, Toni Morrison uses words that people use in their everyday lives. Like, she's not writing in a completely different register or anything, but in some amazing way, like, it's so elevated and it feels so different and so profound, and yeah, really fascinating. So the kind of premise is these two girls, they meet when they're young at, I guess, some kind of like social care home, because their various like mothers are not parenting correctly, I guess, because of various reasons. But what is one of the key features of the short story is that you don't know the race of which girl, but you know that they are different races, and you know about how they react and interact with each other, and how their mothers react and interact with each other too. And so part of your reading is kind of trying to figure out, or trying to like racially categorize each one, and the race of a particular character is also contentious in the short story. And yeah, it's just very good, and I would really recommend reading it. Next, I finally finished The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold. And yeah, I don't have like any of these books with me right now because of the whole moving thing. I'd say this is like quite a big book on BookTube, like it's pretty common and popular. You know, it's a non-fiction book about history, about the lives of the women who were like the 5 women who were the like canonical victims of Jack the Ripper during the Victorian era. And it does, focus mostly on them rather than on him, which is, counter to a lot of the coverage of the murders that we normally see, or like the sort of cultural ideas about Jack the Ripper. But I did find this fundamentally really like bad. Well, I guess that's not entirely fair, but like I felt two kind of ways. One is that I think that the history that this was talking about is really good, and the amount of research that Hallie Rubenhold must have done is really deeply impressive, especially because all of these 5 women were all working class Victorian women, with different stratifications of sort of like access and material privilege, or like structural privilege, I guess, within that, but nonetheless like all working class. And so, you know, that was really interesting. It must have required, yeah, like I said, like hours and hours and hours and hours of research and just like a lot of work. And I think it's really vital in terms of accessible history, is to have accessible working class history, which, you know, it's so easy to not because of how, I don't know, how cultural and institutional historical the historical gaze works. We often really just hyper focus on like middle class and upper class people as if they're the majority of people who were alive, and as if like they are the only people who made substantial or whose lives were like important enough to know about, when actually there's just like a fundamental essence of like aliveness that makes you, and humanity, I guess, that makes your life worth knowing about and worth living. But anyway, so yeah, so there's like that side which I have a respect for what the book is doing in that respect. But then on the other hand, I feel like really uncomfortable and have like a really big issue with the way that Hallie is positioning the 5 women who were murdered. And she goes, you know, through each 5 of them, she tells their stories, but as she's telling their stories, her kind of overall idea is that like the women that Jack the Ripper didn't killed were not prostitutes. They were, I don't know, these other things. They were not that, and they've been greatly maligned because they have been called prostitutes. And, you know, I mean, I think the book itself doesn't think at all about what sex work is or how it functions or any of that stuff. So, you know, already is going to fall through some cracks, I think. But yeah, on a fundamental level, like, she's just so desperate to prove that these women were not sex workers that it just makes you feel awful. Like, there is no inherent value judgment when somebody is a sex worker. And if we start from that position, like, then we can build a ground of like cross solidarity with women who were not sex workers and women who were maybe treated in the same category but had very different experiences, even particular differences in terms of like, I don't know, agency, all of that kind of stuff. But there's none of that, you know, and instead you're supposed to feel bad because women who were not sex workers were treated like they were sex workers. Yeah, I really just didn't like that. Like, trying to prove somebody's not a sex worker, it's not going to help you. And on top of the fact that 2 of the women who were killed, like, it's pretty proven, at least for one of them, and the second one, who's Elizabeth Stride, Mary Jane Kelly and Elizabeth Stride, like, you know, it's pretty likely. So at least 2 out of those 5 women, like, they did participate in sex work in some capacity. So to say that Jack the Ripper didn't kill prostitutes is weird. He did. And I guess what maybe she's trying to say, but she doesn't say this, is that the women that Jack the Ripper murdered, maybe he didn't target because they were sex workers, but nonetheless, you know, they were, or they were very close to sex work, or maybe they did, you know. I mean, it was just, sorry, I feel like I've talked about this book for ages now. But anyway, so yeah, I guess that fundamental kind of framework that it was trying to use just made me feel really, really, I just did not like it the whole time, and I wish it hadn't, you know, I wish he had thought about it way more clearly and considerately and compassionately, you know. Like, the last section, the like concluding section, I think was the worst for the kind of sentiment that she was saying throughout the whole book. Yeah, and then I did also feel really uncomfortable with about like how alcoholism was sometimes talked about, because I'm pretty sure every single woman had issues with alcoholism, but like that kind of through line was never entirely sort of talked about directly, which is stupid because it's obviously like part of a structural violence against women and working class people too, just in general, but in this case specifically women. Like, yeah, she relies a lot on police description with no scrutiny of the gaze of the police that they bring to social care. Anyway, so yeah, it was not good, and it wasn't as good as I thought it could be, but I do have a respect for the history that was included. And I am glad that I know way more about these 5 women whose murderer has been so held up in a kind of really gross, glorifying way, also just in a deeply misogynistic way, and I'm glad to know them more. I did also personally find the Elizabeth Stride chapter like so fascinating, in part because I was like, suddenly she might be able to have spoken Yiddish, and I was just like, are you kidding? That's so cool. Because yeah, some of the women would like take on char work for Jewish families in the East End of London who would mostly just speak Yiddish, and so would learn how to do that, because then they would like do the cleaning on Shabbat when you're not supposed to, because you're not supposed to work, so you're prohibited from doing that kind of thing. Anyway, that was like a very Spark Notes version, but the chapter isn't, you know, entirely about that. It's also just about her as a person, and I thought she was like a really fascinating figure who like lied about being the like sibling of this woman kind of to get money from her, and just all sorts of like, you know, pretty like intense stuff, but like very interesting. So yes, there's that, and finally I will stop talking about it. The next book I read was a buddy read with Biblioghoul, and this was for Women in Translation Month, and that's The Adventures of China Iron by Gabriella Cabezon Camara, translated by Fiona McIntosh and Iona McIntyre. They have very like connected names, I feel. Yeah, and I came away feeling maybe like ambivalent about this. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about all parts of it. I really liked, it's split into 3 sections, and I really enjoyed the first section. I felt like that was very like, it was great, and it was very like vivid and evocative, and actually the second section was also that too, but I found that really, really hard a section to read because it was so violent, and I just, you know, I didn't want to think about it, and I didn't like it. And if I wasn't buddy reading, I probably would have stopped at that point, but because I might have just skipped like to the 3rd section because I was interested in how the book ended. But yeah, so for a while I was really, really not enjoying it, and then the 3rd section was very interesting and I did like it. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, and I would like to kind of read more about other people's responses, especially Indigenous responses to that the ending. It was an interesting novel to read. It is this kind of like queer retelling of like gaucho literature, and I guess one of the things that I really did very sharply feel whilst I was reading it was just that like I really don't know very much about Argentinian literature or history, and I need to, and I think I definitely need to in order to have really got like the full extent of the book, you know. So yeah, that's something that I'll be trying to remedy. I mean, it's the same with lots of South America for me, I guess, specifically, but also, I mean, I know very little about the world, so you know, that's always something that I'm going to be working on. The fact that this book was, I think it was shortlisted for the International Booker a couple of years ago, maybe like 2020 actually, and they made like a bunch of videos and they sort of interviewed some people, like the people who translated it and also the author. The fact that they did that actually really helped me too, because when I was like in my kind of lull, I'm gonna give up reading this book stage, I watched those talks and interviews and it made me more interested. One thing that I wish there was more of actually was like the translator's note. This is also, I feel like, what I say about a lot of books because I'm just really interested in like language translation and that kind of thing, and like yeah, I just wish that the translator's note had gone more into depth about stuff, because like for example there's another language that shows up in it, and so I wanted them to talk more about like how they dealt with that / how they thought about that, and like, but yeah, anyway, like I think it's a good book, especially because it's just so extremely vivid, even though it is also quite like, I don't know, whimsical, fairy tale-esque. I mean, the beginning is also pretty intense, and like the main character is very young and is already like, yeah, I don't want to, anyway. It's just quite a lot, but like I do think it's worthwhile, yeah, if you're up for it. The next book I read was also for Women in Translation, and I think I did read it during the Women in Translation month readathon that was hosted on BookTube, and that's Fair Play by Tove Jansson, translated from the Swedish by Thomas Teal. Yeah, it was lovely. Like, it was just so lovely. There's just this sense of like thoughtful goodness that is just wonderful, and yeah, I don't know, it just was so special, and it is gay, but at the same time like it is sort of like perhaps not as explicit as it could be, but at the same time it's also like extremely illuminating and so blatantly clear, you know. It's one of those things where, you know, yeah, sure, like, I don't know, they don't say that they're in love or anything, but you don't even need to say that, you know, because it's so obvious. Or like it's part of every movement, every word, every sound, I don't know. And it's also just about like art and like a practice of art and like commitment. It's lovely. It's told in these like, it's very short, it's told in these like little sort of vignettes or like chapters of various kind of times, and it's about Mari, and which I also really liked because obviously the person whose book I was reading was Mari, so Mari and Yona, that's it. Yeah, and they're artists. They're I guess they're like in their 70s or something. Like, it is also a bit about aging, and that was also really lovely to read too. Yeah, I don't know, like I don't want to talk about this in too much depth because there's just these sort of instances that kind of show people's connection to each other, and I don't want to like take that away from reading people who are going to read it for the first time, because it is so slight too. It's not like there's loads to discover or anything, but it's just so full of heart, and yeah, I just really loved it. And finally, the last book I read in August, gosh, I almost said April, was Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. Yes. I really enjoyed this. It's interesting reading people's criticism afterwards, and I think some of it I just don't really understand, but I don't know. There seems to be a sort of somewhat of a understanding of like what the book is. But yeah, no, it's just like really fun. You know, obviously it's like billed as lesbian necromancers in space, and I don't actually think I would like agree with that. I feel like it makes it seem like it's more spacey than it is. I don't think it's particularly spacey. Not to say it's not like sci-fi fantasy, although I do think that it's like sci-fi and fantasy, like it's not just sci-fi. Yeah, it's great. There were a couple things that I had an issue with, but overall I just had like a really fun time reading, and it was like very sort of, yeah, just like entertaining in like a nice way, because there's, you know, like dykes in it, which I'm always here for. I would say that my like key issues were, or like one of them is more of an issue and the other is just like kind of like an annoyance, I guess. So my main issue is just that like it's about necromancy a lot, you know, and there are a lot of descriptions of people's bodies, but especially or specifically people's bodies being like extremely thin, and you know, again, that it's like supposed to be this whole like a necromancer like comes to look like a skeleton, and that's because they're so close to death, blah blah blah. But what that really means is just that you're like constantly describing like extreme thinness, and you know, that makes me uncomfortable on lots of levels, but especially because like, you know, some of the characters are supposed to be desirable in part because they're so thin, and I did not like that at all. It's just fat phobia, and not only that is it's just like really uncomfortable to read, because like, you know, it's not great to be constantly thinking about how thin the characters are. And I also think it's pretty lazy, like to have that connection. Like it's pretty boring. You know, the like, oh, the person who can like reanimate skeletons looks like a skeleton, like wow, that's so shocking. So yeah, that was my major problem. And then my other thing was just that like I really felt like Harrow and Gideon, the two main characters, that they should have been older. Like there was no reason for them to be like 18 and 17 or whatever. I mean, they didn't read like they were 18 or 17, and also just like they didn't need to be that age, you know. It's not like it was at a school, it's not like it was, you know, whatever, in some kind of teen setup, you know. It was, you know, they could have been in their early 20s and I think it would have worked much better. And that's partially just because like, I mean, the character's not 18, like the character's older than that. But no, I did really enjoy it, and I like the writing. There's a couple points where it was like, this is actually not very clear anymore, and there were definitely two characters who one like pair of characters who were referred to as each other, the character of each other, like in the book. I'm pretty sure, like I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure, in which case that was like an editing problem, but they're so like interchangeable. But then yeah, and then there was another set of characters who were twins, which made them even more interchangeable, and I thought that they also weren't like very clearly delineated, and it wasn't like I don't remember who was supposed to be the most beautiful one, and it wasn't very clear, because of course there has to be a most beautiful twin, obviously, a most beautiful identical twin, obviously. But yeah, otherwise I'm gonna definitely keep reading the series. I did almost try to keep reading when I had finished it, but I do have other things to read. That is everything I read in August. I know I shared another TBR, and I, you know, of course haven't been very good with that, but we'll hopefully make some more progress. I feel like I have also been reading quite a lot of books but not finishing them, which is why there's only 5 here. Like I started The Idiot, for example, but I haven't finished it yet, and you know, a couple other books. So yeah, I think that's everything for today. Let me know if you read any of these or what you read during August, and yeah, I will see you when I next see you. Okay, bye!